Hey everybody, it is January 24th.
Wow, time is flying
is flying by. January is flying by. 1 month down in 2022. 11 to go. We're 1/12 of the way there, Al. I'm joined, as always, by my wife, Alexandra.
Hello,
Alex,
everybody.
At Alsol.
I hope everyone is staying warm in the Northeast, but I will say
Yeah.
it was pretty chilly. You think I'm
Yeah,
crazy.
but she woke up this morning, so we're in Florida for a little bit before we're moving into Brooklyn next month.
Oh, people are asking that, by the way. They're like, did you move to Florida?
We didn't move to Florida.
No, you did
not yet.
Oh, hi, Alan Verdugo.
But Alex woke up this morning. She's like, "It's so chilly here," and I'm like, "Tell that to the people in the Northeast." Well, by Florida winter standards, it was in their low 50s this morning.
Yeah, I wore a fleece outside.
You had to wear a fleece in Florida.
Yes,
we are moving into the Boerum Hill, Brooklyn Heights neighborhood. Somebody's asking. Verdugo recently had a birthday, I think.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
We miss you, Verdugo.
Verdugo, one of good friend and former CBS News colleague, still traveling the world for the network of Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite.
Ben Fox said we should move to Tampa.
Ben Falk won't move to Tampa. No, Ben has to move back to Tampa first. Ben also says we should move to Darien, Connecticut. So Ben has lots of thoughts.
Well, you're happy with Connecticut these days, right?
Am I happy with Connecticut?
You were just telling me that...
Oh, no, I just said there's a headline out of Connecticut. I don't pass judgment on the nutmeg state. I just said we're going to have a headline from Connecticut tonight that does not involve
So tell the people...
Ben's fantasy football win.
Tell the people what we're going to be talking about tonight. Give them a little...
We'll give them a tease.
A little
So we have a few
tease.
topics to discuss tonight. Somebody's already asking here, is it too early for the Biden swearing joke? No, it is not too early. Biden earlier this evening, about 4 hours ago, called a reporter, not thinking he was still on microphone, a stupid son of a bitch. We'll get into that in a second. We watched some crazy football over the weekend. A lot of questions. Probably the most popular question I got was related to Ukraine and Russia, especially as we see these concerning headlines about escalation. We will get into that. A week from Friday, guys, marks the beginning of the Winter Olympic Games in Beijing. Beijing, the first city in the world that will host both the Winter Games and the Summer Games. Remember, they had the Summer Games back in 2008. We'll get into the controversy around the Olympics. We'll touch on a little Omicron vaccine mandate, the protests over the weekend, what the state of play is, etc. And then we have some interesting Supreme Court news. They announced today they're taking up an affirmative action case, which is fascinating because given the nature of the court, we could, first of all, we'll hear this next docket, so next year, so you won't see a ruling on this till spring, summer 2023. But it is fascinating, and this year will mark now nearly 20 years. Next year will mark 20 years since Senator O'Connor said we probably won't need affirmative action in 25 years in the ruling in 2003 that stood up affirmative action. So we'll get into that as well.
Those are some exciting headlines.
Wide variety. We watched the first couple episodes of Ozark.
We did.
In other news.
We were also...
that show's dark.
But before that, Mosh, we watched the Crazy Games.
Which crazy games?
Football.
Oh, yeah. So we had every game over the weekend decided by a field goal or in the final score. The game was won. Congrats to the Cincinnati Bengals, who it's been several decades now since they were in the AFC Championship game. So that is... congrats to the city of Cincinnati. I'm sort of rooting for them as a Bears fan with no one to root for this offseason, and now that the Packers are out of the games, sort of rooting for Cincy.
So someone asked, who asked this? TM420 New York said, who are you rooting to win the Super Bowl?
Right now, I'm going with Cincinnati. Like Midwest, haven't won it ever. And that's interesting. Though you could see a repeat of that the Super Bowl from a couple decades ago, San Francisco Bengals Super Bowl, which we haven't seen in several years. LA has won a lot lately, so they have the Rams going for them. And then Kansas City, which has been crushing it for a number of years. My heart goes out to the Bills fans. I know Buffalo was I was rooting for you guys. Though you guys are going to be good for a while, so I don't worry about you guys too long. By the way, bottom of the screen, if you want to support the account, There's an opportunity to buy badges that helps support what I'm doing here on Instagram.
Because this is your hobby.
This is my
your side
this
hustle.
is our side hustle. So appreciate all of you who can support this as we seek to build this out. We got the newsletter launching next month, which is very exciting. And for those of you who are not members on Patreon, preview this Thursday night, I'll have Jen Crawford, chief legal correspondent of CBS News, on with me for a Patreon Venmo donors only Zoom, talking about all things Supreme Court and what we're going to see when it comes to abortion, gun rights, religion, what's left of the vaccine COVID decisions. Will Stephen Breyer retire? He's 83, and affirmative action.
And also, I don't know if people know this, but Jan Crawford remember you posted that reel about what Jan Crawford was saying about vaccines, Yes, so Jan, good memory, Al. So Jan was on an end of the year panel at Face the Nation, on the CBS Sunday morning shows Face the Nation, talking about kind of lessons of the year, and she said like the most non-talked about story of the year was related to what COVID has done to children, and all these limitations, etc., and what it's meant to this generation of kids growing up. She's the mother of 4, so pending Jan's School, we're talking about that. We definitely will talk about that. That's going to be an incredible Patreon. I'm so excited for that.
So we'll put up more details on that tonight. You can go to the link in my bio to join Patreon and be part of that, where you can ask your questions.
Okay, so there are a lot of questions, so I want to run through them before you move on, if that's okay.
Okay.
It's Tracy said, is there a free version of the newsletter, or is it all paid? Just curious.
Newsletter will come out several times a week. Some will be free. Some will be behind a paywall. Still going to figure it out and hope to get your feedback on that. The goal is to get some paid subscribers aboard for certain levels of content, but certain editions will be free as well. And we're figuring that out as we speak.
Bahar Flower asked, how do you feel about the new Insta Subscriptions option?
Insta Subscriptions, I think it's very exciting. I have not been able to play with the pages of people who've gotten it. I've been in touch with Instagram. They're looking to gradually roll it out to more folks. What's essentially going to enable you to do is make certain content available to everybody, and then certain stories and posts only available to paid subscribers. So, I think... hold on one second. Let me just deal with some folks who... Anyway, sorry. Blocking folks who are not adding to the conversation. So, as it happens, if you don't feel like you can contribute an educated comment to the conversation, then you will be kicked out of this situation. Anyway, what was I going to say?
I don't even know what you were talking about. Because I just read what that person wrote and got completely sidetracked.
Yeah. So...
subscriptions. So my take on this, even though nobody asked, is that I feel like people, like creators like this, because this allows creators to make money on constantly posting on Instagram and giving information, so it makes sense for creators. But for for people on Instagram, I mean, it might be a little bit annoying. I've heard, because you follow these people, you want all the content. But on the other side of the coin is, I follow people and I learn so much from people on Instagram. Like, I think Instagram is an incredible educational resource and tool, and I would be more than happy to pay the people that I follow and learn so much from. So I think there are two ways of thinking about it.
I think the idea being that, like, for a lot of folks on Instagram, they're either building, they're selling a product, or, it's ultimately they're trying to make a living on the platform by contributing whatever it is, whether it's information, whether it's insight when it comes to health, advice, selling you homemade crafts, etc. So I think that Instagram is trying to find ways to enable creators to live on the platform and make a living on the platform.
And I credit Masseri for that.
Yeah.
Because that is giving people are able to fulfill their dreams now. If if, for example, I follow a woman who bakes bread. I mean, she has thousands of followers.
But I will say you bake very good bread, so I follow you.
She has thousands of followers talking about how she does the starter for her sourdough. I mean, and she can now make money from being on Instagram. I mean, and fulfilling her true passion and what she loves in life.
Yep.
I mean, so it's really giving people an opportunity to do what they want to do. So I give them.
Somebody's saying, does it turn into social media tipping? In a way, I mean, right now, badges, by the way, those of you who've bought badges at the bottom of the screen, you're sort of tipping, right? You're like, oh, you're providing a good service. I enjoy the service. Like, I can give you $1 or $2 or whatever. And the subscriptions, you can kind of do it in a more formal way.
The real Nicole said, we want to get you as much of the money. We want to give you as much of the money. If IG takes a larger cut than Venmo or Patreon, we want to know.
I will let you know what is most useful. And so, yeah, Patreon's great because it also is a place where I can kind of put stuff behind a wall for contributors. Patreon does take a small cut. Venmo takes an even smaller cut. Instagram, like badges, there's a certain cut that goes to Apple and Google, but not to Instagram right now. There's always the man. The man always wants to take a cut. Okay, so
you have a couple more things before you
delve into the news?
Yeah.
Okay.
So B. Schnapper said, saw you at Bourbon in Aventura on Thursday night. Wish I said hello. Wasn't 1,000% sure it was you guys.
So, lesson, by the way, you can learn from me is, and Alex has seen this too, if I think I see somebody on the street, I will shout their name, and then it'll either be them or a stranger who's like, why are you calling me that? But at the same time, like, you see me or Alex out there, come say hi. No matter where. But I've definitely gotten some notes from some of you who are like, were you at JFK Airport on the 17th of whatever? And I was like, that was not me. That was a doppelganger. But, say hi. They might be friendly.
Like, you're not famous enough that people are coming to you every second and it's annoying. Like, so appreciate
I like it.
Yeah.
For now. Until I tell you that I won't like it. I hope to reach a day where I won't like it. But
right now, we love it.
Yeah.
Paige Merrill says, Mosh, is your hair darker or am I crazy?
I think it's the lighting in here. We have like a yellowish brown paint here where we're staying in South Florida, and I think it's the light and the paint might be leading. Al, can you confirm my hair color hasn't changed?
I'm going to tell you what it is. It's not the gross paint color. Yeah. What it is your hair is just really long.
My hair's long.
So it looks darker. And I will say, to your credit, even though you think you might be losing hair, your hair is still a beautiful shade of dark brown.
A beautiful shade of dark brown, she says.
You would never color it.
Yeah.
So if it's darker, it's merely because it's long and he's getting a haircut tomorrow.
I'm getting a haircut tomorrow, everybody. You heard it here first.
I like it, but you think it's too long.
I think it's too long. All right, can we delve into question one?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, topic one is Ukraine-Russia. Guys, I know everyone's concerned with the events that they're watching unfold over there. Right now, it appears Putin is amassing more troops on the border. By the way, they share about a 1,200-mile border, Ukraine and Russia. The Russians have continued to amass troops. Basically, the bottom line is here that Putin has laid down to the West, like, please, you need to promise that you will never let Ukraine into NATO, the North American Treaty Organization, the alliance, basically, of Western nations that historically was put together to protect the West against the Soviet Union. That continued after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But Russia doesn't like, effectively, it feels that it's intruding on its backyard, right? That certain NATO countries are literally on the Russian border. And so they compare it to, like, well, U.S., how would you feel if Mexico, was part of a military alliance that you viewed as threatening? You wouldn't like that either. That's Putin's argument, but Putin also says other things. So he has made a whole list of demands to the West, including stop your eastward expansion, don't admit Ukraine as a member. And the West is like, no, we've already promised Ukraine that they can be a member of NATO. And by the way, Russia, you have a history of supporting authoritarian regimes in the neighborhood and kind of this dream of rebuilding the Soviet empire. Remember, the Soviets had dozen-plus countries that all went independent in the early 90s with the collapse of the Soviet Union. So Russia, Putin views the biggest failure in recent Russian history as the collapse of the Soviet Union, and he wants to rebuild that. And Putin has now been there for 20-plus years and views this as an opportunity. Putin's about to turn 70 years old to help return Russia to the grandeur of the previous century. He wants to be what the Soviets viewed as this large country that people take seriously and not this afterthought. The world has kind of moved on. You got the U.S., you got China. We're all kind of focused on other things. And Russia's like, what about us? We're still great. We're still grand. We're still big. And so part of this is psychological and part of this could be literal. And that's what the U.S. and the West are trying to decipher right now, which is what does Putin actually want to do here? Did he want to just take a stand? Have things gotten too far? Remember, many wars over the centuries have come out of one leader or another, a handful of personalities trying to do one thing, not thinking it would lead to war. But your move, it's a chess match. You move a piece, the other side moves a piece, the other side moves a piece, the other side moves a piece, and suddenly someone's dead. And so the concern is, how do you de-escalate the situation? Because even if it wasn't Putin's intention to start a war, he was just trying to, exercise his strength and power. The moves and the counter moves and the moves and the counter moves could lead to an actual war. And the more troops you put on the border, the more chance there is for a mistake, the more chance there is to kind of force a mistake, right? People are concerned about Putin kind of creating something to, say, hey, something happened over there. We got to start the war. And so ultimately, that is like the larger concern. So you've seen the U.S. announce today they put 8,500 troops on standby to go to the border there. NATO is adding troops to the region. The British are concerned that Russia is going to try to install a puppet government in the Ukraine. One question I did get was, how many American troops are in Ukraine right now? 200 National Guard troops. They're in the far western part of Ukraine, though. Remember, if there's a conflict, it would happen on the eastern side of Ukraine. That is where the more Russian-speaking population is, that the Russians feel they should have control over. And so ultimately, that's the situation there. The Biden officials have threatened sanctions. They feel like the threat of sanctions is not working yet. They don't want to launch the sanctions because then they feel like they'll have nothing in their quote-unquote arsenal to use against the Russians, so they're holding back sanctions. At the same time, Putin's like, I haven't moved a soldier away from these sanctions, right? So you're just like, well, what else can we do? Can we threaten more troops? Should we move in more troops? Right now, the one thing, keep in mind, the U.S. is not doing is promising to fight on behalf of the Ukrainians or send in more troops. And by the way, there's always an opportunity that should things come to actual military conflict, more than, by the way, we've seen for the past decade, in the past 8 years or so, there's been ongoing battles between the Russians and the Ukrainians. The U.S. might pull out those 200 National Guard troops just to keep them away, so we don't lose any American lives there. And they'll have to figure out a way, the U.S. will and the West will, to support Ukraine without directly intervening and creating a war between the U.S. and Russia.
Kate G. said he wants it to be the Soviet Russia from when he was left behind in Dresden.
Yeah. One of the things that, if you look back at the history, is, also, hold on, I think I have a map here of, let me try this. All right, that's only part of it. Okay, so here's a map here. Basically, on the right side of your screen is where Russia is, would come in from Ukraine. But the important thing to think about Ukraine here is Ukraine's a country of 44 million people. You got Belarus to the north, you got Moldova to the south. But Ukraine over on the west, that country just over the border, upper left, is Poland. So it puts Russia right there on the border of Europe, which is Europe's concern. And even if they're not literally taking over Ukraine, influence over Ukrainian politics, puts them on the border of Europe.
You're impressing a lot of people, including Ben Falk, which he's very hard to impress with your map.
Okay. Well, I went over to Google Maps, and I was like, I just want to give people a sense of like what we're talking about here. Putin likes to say, and by the way, we can fact check some of this, that effectively Russia and Ukraine are one thing. There is Ukrainian language. Ukrainian language has been around for more than 1,000 years. Ukraine has had many bouts of independence. They had Cossacks there. But Ukraine's also been occupied by a lot of countries. They were occupied by Poland and Lithuania for many, many years. They were occupied by the Russians for many years. By the way, they had a couple years of independence when the Tsar came apart, but then Soviets basically came in a couple years later. Stalin effectively forced starvation on the Ukrainians to prove a point and killed almost 4 million Ukrainians. And so, Russia and Ukraine, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of years, and most recent, some really terrible experiences the Ukrainians had at the hands of the Russians. Finally, 1991 comes around, the Soviets collapse, and Ukraine, for real, has independence, which they've now had for 30 years. Now, one of the things you're seeing here, guys, is lessons from 2014. What happened in 2014? Obama was president, and he went through this thing with Putin, where they, told the Russians, like, don't mess around, and Putin took Crimea, which is a southern province of Ukraine. Basically just took it, annexed it, and now it's part of Russia. And so I think what you have here is the West is trying to learn the lesson of like, well, we didn't stop Putin last time. How do we stop him this time? And one thing to keep in mind through all of this is that other people look to how the West interacts here. Because if, for example, Putin can just walk into Ukraine, take a whole bunch of land, the Chinese are like, okay, cool, we can finally do that with Taiwan, because we've been wanting Taiwan back for like 60 years. So if Biden and the West aren't standing up to Putin, then let's just go take out Taiwan. Now, Taiwan's a completely different situation, and we've made different promises there. But ultimately, that's why this sort of situation matters and how we handle it matters, because other countries around the world look to, well, if they can do that, why can't we do it? And that's kind of where you stand.
Yeah, because Ben Proctor said he gave Putin Crimea, no consequences.
Yeah, there were no consequences for Putin. Putin got to have the Winter Olympics, and we're going to talk about the Olympics in a second, in Sochi. And there are no ramifications for him.
Before you go there, Peck Larsk asked, do you think the U.S. is handling the situation well?
I think that it's hard to assess at this point if the U.S. is handling this well. We'll have to know after the fact, right? Because we only know part of what's going on, right? There were negotiations last week in Geneva, Switzerland, partially between the U.S. and the Russians, mostly behind closed doors, minus, you saw my former colleague, Christina Ruffini, caught up with the Russian minister who was trying to sneak through the coat racks to get to the meeting and avoid the press, but she caught up with him and got a question into him. Anyway, so ultimately, what I got here? Oh, okay. Okay. But we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Sorry, I had to block somebody. And so we know there's diplomacy going on behind the scenes. All we know is what's being announced publicly. And so it's kind of like when you look back at the Cuban Missile Crisis between like JFK and Khrushchev. You only find out years and sometimes decades later what was actually going on and what was actually being said and the letters that were crossing between the two. So ostensibly, there could be a whole conversation happening right now. Not sure, it could, given modern leaks, it would hold, but like between Putin and Biden and between the two sides of like, how can we de-escalate? Because ultimately a major war between the countries is not positive. It doesn't necessarily work. And given how things are escalating here, can Putin get away with a quick land grab of Ukraine without major ramifications, given what's going on? And again, it speaks to like what his original intentions were. And so I did my master's degree in conflict resolution and diplomacy at GW back in the day. And one of the things you learn when you're doing conflict resolution and diplomacy is each side has to come away with something it feels is a win. In particular here, how can you come to an agreement here, short of war, where Putin feels like he won something? He's like, well, guys, he can go back to his people and be like, listen, we didn't do war, but like, guess what I got in return? And so you have to figure out what carrot, what thing you can give Putin that he can take back to his people, and that feels sufficient enough.
Do you use that in our relationship? What you've learned? I
often amass 100,000 troops on the border of Alex when she's in the kitchen and make demands.
So you have a couple questions here. Melissa says, do you foresee U.S. troops being deployed?
So keep in mind, guys, that we have tens of thousands of troops already in Europe. We have another 8,500 on standby. NATO, which we work with, or part of the alliance of NATO, has a whole bunch of troops there. And so will more be deployed? I think you might have some movements, right? We also have a whole bunch of troops in the Middle East, which could move up in that direction. Again, it all depends on what serves a purpose here. Because remember, the last thing you want to do is reinforce Putin's fear that there's more Western troops on his border. Well, we're literally doing that right now because the feeling is that he hasn't been listening to us yet. Well, then that just perpetuates things and makes things worse and worse and worse. So you could argue that like being more aggressive is hurtful, but then you could also argue that Putin doesn't take you seriously unless you're aggressive. And so there's multiple schools of thought here in terms of what should be done. Go ahead.
Mike Laurie says, how likely is war with Russia? And then Ben Falk had a follow-up question. If we're in an active war, do American companies pull out of Russia?
So that's a good question. I mean, one of the things we know with China is that American companies need the Chinese market so much with their billion consumers that pulling out of China is difficult for American companies, right? Especially those who've worked years to get in there. Russia's a different story, right? It's a smaller marketplace, and so do you think some American companies can win, gain some kind of public relations win, or win with the U.S. government by taking a stand against Russia? You might see that in the coming weeks. And what was the other question related to that?
How likely is war with Russia?
How likely is war? Again, I think both parties don't have an interest in war. I think both parties are concerned about how it could escalate. Remember, God forbid, it won't get here. But like U.S. and Russia have the most nuclear bomb. We have more nuclear missiles between us. We could destroy the Earth multiple times over, right? This is all holdover from the Cold War days. So your concern with war is things could escalate from one thing to another, one thing or wonder, a misunderstanding, a miscue, explosion that wasn't intended for something, and things could get worse. I would say, it's not completely unlikely that we could see some skirmishes there. Now, keep in mind, by the way, guys, there's been kind of a low-level war where thousands have died over the past 8 years. Since Russia took Crimea, Russia has kind of built up some insurgent units across eastern Ukraine. Eastern Ukraine are the areas that are the most Russian-speaking. Many Ukrainians speak both Ukrainian and Russian. In those eastern provinces, there's folks who have much more of an allegiance to Russia. And so Russia's been kind of provoking and doing funny business in the eastern provinces for years. So it's not like things are hunky-dory, totally peaceful in eastern Ukraine, and they haven't been. The question is will any of those 100,000 plus troops cross the border officially? Go ahead.
S. Miller said, why are we pulling Americans out of Ukraine if war is not imminent?
So right now, what we've said is the families of diplomats in Ukraine should come out. And if you're an American tourist in Ukraine, you should get out commercially because we can't promise to get you out militarily should things escalate. That is more of a, things are getting pretty hot there. If you don't really need to be there, get out. And by the way, these were the warnings we gave Americans for about a year leading up to the evacuation of Kabul this summer. It was like, get out. Get out. Please get out. If you don't need to be there, get out. Now, of course, like Afghanistan and Ukraine, you have Americans who have families there, who have intermarried or are married Ukrainians and have a life there, etc. So it's not that easy, right? At the same time, I think that upset the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians were like, well, why are you making us look bad by saying you got to get your people out? Like, Kiev is safe. Actually, I think Kiev is safer than LA, which is what I think the Ukrainian president told CNN. So, go ahead.
Magic Mike asked about, in relation to Ben Falk's question, about Russian companies. About
American companies
in Russia. Do we have lots of American companies in Russia?
There's a bunch of American companies that do business in Russia, in particular in kind of industrials, chemicals, mining, oil. I would need to get back to you with a list. You probably could do an easy Google, which is what I will do after this live, which is American companies with largest Russia connections or largest investments in Russia, and that'll give you a good sense of which companies. And they're probably not consumer household names. They're probably more in the kind of industrial space.
Melissa was saying, I wish more people understood that we warn people to get out of Afghanistan.
Yeah, I mean, and I posted them, like all the memos the State Department put out, like, get out, you should get out, like, this is going to be bad, which the State Department put out every month to Americans there.
B. Schnapper said, should we tell Americans to avoid travel to Russia?
Yeah, it was actually kind of funny. The State Department put out a note, which is like, avoid, if you're American, you should consider getting out of Russia and Ukraine, and by the way, avoid travel there because of war and also COVID. It was like, at the end of the note, like, and COVID. Yeah, come back to America. We got COVID totally handled well. Anyway, okay.
Would you like to, is there another?
I'd like to move on to the next topic.
Yes, I could sense it.
Okay, so we're moving on to the Olympics, which a week from Friday, guys, start the 2022 Beijing Winter Games. Beijing being the first city to host both the Winter Games and the Summer Games. That was a big deal for China. I posted yesterday Bob Costas, the famous NBC anchor who was there for many, many years, calling out the International Olympic Committee for continuing to give the Olympic Games to authoritarian regimes. Of course, they gave it to China in 2008. They gave it to Russia in 2014. They gave it to China again in 2022. And this is for a number of factors, because I got a few of you asking me, why does China have the Olympics if like we have so many issues with them and we're concerned about, how they treat their minorities, etc. Well, this is the deal, guys. The lessons from the Olympics, and the modern Olympics start again in 1896, right? And then the Winter Games start a little bit afterwards. So we're really only, 130 years into the modern Olympics. The Greeks had it way back in the day. We took a 2,000 year break, and then we had the Olympics again. In the modern era, the Olympics have gotten so expensive for cities and countries to put on. The promise was always, we'll put on the Olympics and we'll have great tourism for many, many years, and it's a great coming out for a country. And most of the countries have found that they're in debt afterwards. They don't know what to do with the stadiums, and they're extremely expensive. Most infamously, I think Sochi, Russia, cost the Russians like $60 billion to put on. And so who's left to want to host Olympic Games? Well, the Chinese. And in the case of the 2022 Games, everyone basically pulled out. And 2022 was in between Kazakhstan and China. China won by 4 votes, 44-40, on the Olympic Committee. And by the way, speaking of Kazakhstan, their chaos of the past few months of buildings getting lit on fire and basically a civil war breaking out there reinforces why the IOC is this is why we didn't go with Kazakhstan for the Olympics. Unfortunately, the Olympics are biased towards countries that are stable and can get things done. So the chaos of Sochi and the chaos of Athens in Greece and the chaos of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, where they weren't sure if the governments could do it, China's like, we're China. We can do whatever we want. We don't have really, the government is the law, and we don't really have zoning issues and democracy issues to deal with. We can basically just bulldoze a piece of land and build a stadium in a couple days. The IOC is like, okay, cool. That's stability. That'll reinforce what we need. Of course, that reinforces that, generally speaking, the IOC has a tendency to give support to regimes that can do this sort of thing. And so that's just something to keep in mind as you ask, why did China get it? Well, because the Olympic Committee likes the efficiency of China. Now, China also had to basically create winter sports venues in a place where it basically doesn't snow. By the way, China, I was looking at this from the 2018 Games. China, while huge in summer games, won 9 medals in the Winter Games in 2018 in Korea. They won 1 gold. They're not a winter sports country. They're a summer sports country. But they're trying to push it. So China's got limited experience with this, but China does have experience just getting huge things done. And as Ben says, sports is a great propaganda tool for them, and national pride tool, etc. And you show the Chinese people, look, the whole world is here, paying respect and homage to China. So it works in their favor. One thing, headline that came out in the last couple of days is U.S. athletes have all been told to use burner phones because China's mandatory Olympic app can hack your phone. They're basically all been warned that the Chinese can surveil all your electronic devices. So everyone I know, journalist-wise, athlete-wise, is bringing new devices to China, assuming the Chinese will hack all their devices.
In terms of China, Chris just said, will it be cold enough to keep the artificial snow from melting?
That is a good question. You know what's crazy about China, given the climate change happening in China, is they're basically losing the desert is making its way closer to China every a couple miles every year. I think I saw 100 miles, but it's increased. The Gobi Desert keeps increasing its size because of how many trees they've taken out and temperature changes there. It'll be interesting to see if they have that challenge. I know Vancouver had that challenge in 2010. I know that Sochi at times had that challenge. It'll be interesting to see to what extent China is able to keep what is the first entirely artificial snow skiing area cold enough to have all its events.
Okay, so you have a couple questions. Let's get to them.
Yeah.
GN0730 says, can you talk about NBC broadcasting remotely? And then K-Shim on that note says, can you talk more about journalists not attending?
So in this case, NBC has made the decision, similar to what they did in Tokyo last year, to have as many remote journalists. So basically, broadcasters in Connecticut, which is a theme of tonight, Connecticut, doing the play-by-play on events in China. Now, given the state of modern technology and the amount of cameras you can have, you could say that if you have 50 cameras in a venue capturing every angle, you could do play-by-play from anywhere in the world. Now, typically, you want to be in the room, you want to capture the culture, the reactions, things that the cameras might miss or the audience might miss. But given the COVID limitations going on in China, the quarantine rules, etc., and of course concerns about their human rights violations, etc., there have been decisions to limit as many people as possible from going there. It will be interesting to see the final count of how many journalists go there, because remember, it's always frustrating as a journalist to be limited. Like if you go all the way around the world to attend an event and then you don't have access to anybody, then what purpose are you serving as a journalist if you can't stick a microphone in somebody's face or see something or observe something? So it'll be interesting to see. There's a lot of cost going into the China thing now too, because remember, you go to a place, the IOC and the country control the venues and the cost, and then by the way, you're now tacking on a couple weeks of quarantine on the front end. So it gets really expensive, and so there's only a handful of organizations that will be able to afford to send someone from there, which then unfortunately reinforces the dilemma, which is there's less people to kind of get a sense of what's really going on, and so the country's able to push out the propaganda that it wants to because there's less independent observers. What will be interesting to see how journalists who are there, how comfortable they are speaking truth, and especially at the risk of whatever the Chinese government might threaten them or hack them or whatever. And so ultimately that's going to be one of the challenges, and somebody especially as we know what's going on in the far western part of China, which is with the Uyghur Muslims, where nearly 1 million people some are in concentration camps and are being mistreated by the Chinese government.
Bates just spoke about that. Thoughts on what Chamath said about no one caring about the abuse of Uyghurs.
So what you're referring to, Bates Venditti, is the Golden States Warriors part owner, who spoke out in an interview he then apologized for, saying nobody cares about the Uyghur Muslims. The Uyghur Muslims are the minority group that the Chinese are mistreating. And he's like, well, nobody cares about them. Come on, don't pretend to care about them. I think what he's trying to say is that, if people really cared about them, well, first of all, he said it in a very kind of inappropriate unfortunate way, which he apologized for his words there. Even the Golden State Warriors, separated themselves from him. They're like, the team doesn't represent these views. This has been a hugely controversial thing, though, because a lot of major companies, CEOs, celebs, have basically, are trying to continue to curry favor with the Chinese government and are not speaking out on behalf of the Uyghur Muslims in that community. And there's just limited information as to what's going on, given limited, press access in China to what's happening to the Uyghur Muslims. And then, the BBC and some others have done some really good documentary work, kind of smuggling out videotape to find out what's going on. In this case, the Warriors owner, spoke out and said nobody cares about them. It was like, no, I actually care about them. Like, okay, dude. I think there's a lot of people dismissing them because they want to curry favor with the Chinese, unfortunately. Go ahead.
Pep Lark said, and other people, so why are we participating in this Olympics?
So the thing is, it's about striking a balance. And the feeling of the U.S. government was we're going to have a diplomatic boycott, which means we're not going to send any officials to the games. The Australians and some others are doing that as well. But that we don't want to hurt the athletes, right? We have a whole bunch of athletes, who work their entire lifetimes to compete in the Olympic Games. And to basically not allow a couple hundred Americans who have spent a lifetime just preparing for these sports to represent their country, not partake over politics. The government felt like we'll try to basically split the difference here, because ultimately boycotting entirely the games, will that serve our purposes and only further, piss off China? The challenge they have is they thought the giving Beijing 08 would help moderate China. And now we've gotten to the point where no, actually giving countries the Olympic Games actually reinforces their agenda and helps them. There's always a feeling during the Cold War that the more you can open countries up and show them the joys of capitalism and Pepsi and M&Ms, but not the green M&M, and that would open them up to be like, I hate my regime, I want green M&Ms and Pepsi, and why don't we have all that stuff in our country? Now you've gotten to the point where authoritarian governments are sort of reinforced there, by decisions like this. You have Shaun White, who's competing in his 5th games. I saw we have 4 5-time Olympians. Shaun White, John Schuster, the curler who won, by the way, we're big in curling now. Katie Ulander in the skeleton, and Lindsay Jacobellis, who's also a snowboarder. And these people worked their whole life to represent their country. So the American government didn't want to, limit that.
Melissa asks, how are they going to keep their zero COVID rules if they let in a ton of people for the Olympics?
Yeah, that's going to be really tough for them. I mean, these countries that are still pursuing zero COVID, I understand the islands like Tonga that had the volcano. You know, they didn't want to interact with the people bringing aid to them post volcano because Tonga is a zero COVID situation. But Tonga is also a country of like, you know, tens of thousands of people. China's a country of like 1.5 billion people. And they've been trying to keep zero COVID going, and it'll be very interesting. And they're also still blaming the mail for bringing in COVID. They're like, don't touch your packages. They're also killing all the hamsters in Hong Kong, or many of them, because they believe a hamster gave COVID to a person, so then they wanted to cull all the hamsters, which is a thing, apparently.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Magic Mike said, didn't China say we'd pay for having a boycott?
Yeah. I mean, it's Diplo speak, right? Well, you'll pay. How are we paying? I don't know.
And then Shannon said, are they really going to swab people's tushies?
I don't know about swabbing the tushies. We're going to wait for people to arrive there, which should be happening this week of the quarantine rules. So we'll wait for those reports of how aggressive China will get in how they detect COVID.
And then S. Miller said, and there is a Jamaican bobsled team coming.
Yes, I wanted to get to like some of the athletes to watch for. We'll do more next week ahead of the games, but you have the Jamaican bobsled team, which is back. So watch Cool Runnings to recap on the history of the Jamaican bobsled team. Also, great John Candy movie, among others. America, we will have the largest ever female athlete contingent as part of our team. It's the second largest ever, all folks, 228 athletes. 45% of our team has competed in a previous Olympics or Youth Olympics, so it's a very experienced team. Our youngest athlete is 16-year-old Alyssa Liu. She's an ice skater. Our oldest athlete, and I can feel this, is snowboarder Nick Baumgartner, who turned 40 last month. Our oldest athlete is 40. As someone turning 40 this year, I am rooting for Nick.
What's your favorite sports watch of the Winter Olympics?
So having grown up in the 80s and 90s, like having been at that crucial period of time for Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding, like figure skating, like holy crap, watching like Nicole, like, by the way, what was the movie we saw years ago?
With
about
Margot
Nicole,
Robbie.
with Margot Robbie.
That was great.
I, Tanya. Oh, that was so good. So figure skating I like. I'm into the curling just because I think it's interesting.
Those were going to be my choices.
Oh, look at
Exactly.
that. Alex and I actually, we have not been together since we met each other after the last Winter Games. The last Winter Games were in Korea in February of 2018. We didn't meet till October of 2018, Al. So this is our first Winter Games together.
Wow. Okay, it's going to be fun.
Yeah. Now that I'm into,
We'll watch.
And also since the last Winter Games, I learned how to ski. I ski
Yes,
with you,
yeah.
so skiing will be much more interesting to me.
That's true.
And I will say this:
Will we watch on YouTube TV on my iPad?
we'll watch on.
We'll be here.
We're gonna be. I think we're officially kind of recording and going to YouTube TV.
Yeah.
So we have that. Incidentally, random fact: there's a big stone rock just off of Donald Trump's golf course in Turnberry, Scotland, where much of the stone for curling stones comes from. Which, when I was producing an interview with Trump in 2018, he pointed out to us. I'll share it on the feed. But like literally, it's like where the stone, where they're sweeping the ice or whatever. It's just off of Trump's golf course in Scotland. Random fact.
There are a few questions. One is, will they still have cardboard beds from Whitney? And then,
Oh,
so we don't know. Do you know that answer?
I don't know. No, I don't know what the Chinese have built for the athletes yet.
And then Super Cali Fragilistic says, will the athletes be held there if there's an outbreak? China blames them for it, and then what?
God knows. Like guys with the COVID thing, they're like, oh, an American like spit on somebody or touched a door handle, and who knows? The thing about Olympics it's ripe for potential diplomatic squabbles because, ultimately, it's a whole bunch of countries there at the same time, and everyone is, very, very close quarters.
S. Miller says we're too young to be snowbirds.
We are way too young to be snowbirds. Yeah, we're not. This is a rare scenario where we moved out of an apartment, the lease wasn't quite ready in a new apartment, and so we're temporarily in Florida.
We're nomads right now.
We're
not
nomadic.
quite snowbirds yet.
Exactly.
Okay. You had a question. Oh, so Shaun White is 35 because Leah Sass said, what? Shaun White isn't 40?
No. Shaun White started young, man. But no, Nick Baumgartner turned 40 in December, and I'm rooting for Nick because he's 40, and he's our oldest athlete at the Winter Games. Go Nick. We also have Nathan Chen, men's figure skater, Michaela Schifrin in skiing, and the U.S. women's hockey team, which won the gold in Korea. It basically goes back and forth between the U.S. and Canada, women's hockey. So let's watch women's hockey. And like the U.S. winning in curling last time was totally cool. For all the Canadians watching, I know you guys tend to take pride in your prowess when it comes to winter sports. So, let's see how our Canadian friends do in China this time.
Another fun fact before you move on from the Olympics is that you once worked at an Olympics.
I was an intern for the NBC Olympics Greco-Roman wrestling and boxing team in Greece in 2004. So I spent the summer of 2004 in Greece and helped produce boxing coverage for the Summer Games in 2004, which was a very, very cool experience back in the day. Young 22-year-old me.
Young 22-year-old Mo. Okay. Oh, so Leah said, did you meet Bob?
Did not meet Bob. Got to meet Katie and Matt at the time, though, on the way to the opening ceremonies. But I was assigned the sport that actually lasts the longest at the Summer Games. Boxing, because there's so many weight classes, almost goes entirely from day one to the last day of the games. And the other interns had other sports that lasted for like 4 days, like 4 days of tennis competition or 4 days of whatever. And so I had to work probably one of the sports that had the most amount of competitions, whereas some of my fellow interns got to party and roam around and meet celebs. Anyway, it was fun. I got to meet, it was a young Michael Phelps. We went out to the Holland House, and I got to see Phelps. I got to see the U.S. women's softball team partied and won that year. So it's a very cool experience.
That is cool.
I have photos on my the hell camera did I have back then? I had a film camera. No, I bought my first digital camera, but it was not very good.
You also have your backpack and your jacket that you wear sometimes.
I still got some 08 or some 04 NBC swag. But very cool thing. All right, we got a couple other topics to get to.
Someone says S. Miller says, Mosh, you're going to have to explain curling rules before they start.
Curling rules?
Yeah.
I hope that they're easier to understand and more fair than the NFL overtime playoff rules. Which incidentally, Kansas City Chiefs fans remind me, the Chiefs wanted the rules changed a couple years ago when they got screwed by the overtime rule when Tom Brady beat them on a first touchdown, and now the Chiefs got to benefit from that rule against yesterday, and so I do think that rule has to go, and I hope that the curling rules are easier to understand.
Melissa says we are going to need you to write an autobiography.
Definitely. I one day feel that I will gather enough information and enough experiences to write an autobiography, but not yet.
I think you have enough.
We're young.
Okay.
All right.
What is next, Mo?
No one's reading that. No one's reading that autobiography.
I think kids who want to go into journalism.
Maybe. But that's what you do in retirement. Okay. Omicron COVID. COVID has peaked in much of the U.S. Deaths remain at about 2,000 a day, unfortunately. Most of the country has peaked and is going down right now. A few states, though, to be worried about have not peaked. North Dakota, it's still headed up. Alabama, hospitalizations have doubled in the last couple of weeks. And Utah is still at 11 times as many cases as it was last month. Hospitalizations are record levels. So, unfortunately, those are 3 states where Omicron has not peaked yet, but also given the scale of things, hoping that ultimately they continue to follow the trend line that we've seen everywhere else and now in the majority of the states. A couple things when it comes to cases right now, mandates right now, is Friday, a federal district court in Texas ruled that the White House federal worker mandate is unconstitutional. That's likely to be upheld. The federal government's already saying that about 95% of its workforce is vaccinated. But the legal rationale that the district court used on the blocking the federal mandate for workers is similar to what the Supreme Court said about OSHA standards for private businesses. So remember, the Supreme Court said, we don't believe that OSHA standards or OSHA has the right to put forth a mandate in workplaces of 100 or more for a variety of reasons, as I shared last week. And now the district court is saying, similar to that, we also don't think they should have a mandate on federal workers. The only mandate that's really stood the test of time and seems to be standing in both states and federally, even the Supreme Court, conservative Supreme Court, is the healthcare worker mandate. That stands, and one thing we mentioned earlier was in regards to Connecticut. The governor has basically recommended that the mandate for teachers and basically everyone except for healthcare workers be lifted. They believe mission accomplished. The testing requirements are too much. 99, close to 100% have already been vaccinated, and they don't want to deal with the mandate rules anymore. But they are keeping it for healthcare workers. It'll be interesting to see, and that's in like a Northeast, pretty liberal state. Interesting to see kind of where these rules go in other states. Yeah.
BM Living says, I'm 70 and would read your autobiography if you wrote it now.
Oh, yeah? Well, I would have to post less on Instagram if I was to write an autobiography.
Yeah, you do not.
I'd have to use my Instagram time for autobiography.
Melissa says, did I read/hear that due to the transmissibility of Omicron, we might reach herd immunity?
So this is a question about herd immunity. Is it a thing or is it not a thing? I know that we thought a lot about it and heard a lot about it early on, was like, will enough people get it for herd immunity? Then will enough people be vaccinated for herd immunity? I mean, what we've learned right now is both with variants popping up as well as waning antibodies, right? You get vaccinated or you have it, and then over time you lose antibodies to it. Now you have other fighters in your system, but the antibodies specific to the variant that you had wane over time, or the antibodies specific to the vaccine that you got wane over time. So is herd immunity, if herd immunity is a thing, is it just temporary? It doesn't seem like we could have permanent herd immunity unless, I don't know, the virus promises us it won't do any more variants, right? And so, Omicron was so different from Delta and previous variants that even if you had the other ones, you still had a chance of getting Omicron, and you did get Omicron. It is interesting to note that a couple of initial studies out of South Africa show that if you had Omicron, it blocks future Omicron, at least short term, and blocks Delta. So it's like rock, paper, scissors. Omicron is rock to Delta's scissors.
Wow.
But is there a paper? We don't know yet.
Do you think that more states will follow suit with like what Colorado did?
Connecticut, you mean?
Yes, I meant, sorry.
It'll be interesting to see how, now that states have seen, everyone's seen with Omicron with this milder variant, that the mandate and the testing requirements have at times canceled flights and meant that most of the workforce can't go in, but everyone's, for the most part, obviously there's some unfortunate cases of hospitalizations and deaths, etc., but that society, how do you learn to live with it? And do mandates help you live with it, or do mandates not help you with it, especially when it comes to transmissibility? Part of the promise of the vaccines initially was they prevent hospitalization and death, which still we know, but there was a feeling and a hope that it would prevent transmissibility, that if you had the vaccine, you wouldn't get it and that you wouldn't transmit it. Well, that we've learned is not the case.
Debunked.
And so ultimately, does a mandate serve a purpose if you're vaccinated? Now, if you're a public health worker and you're a doctor, you're like, we should absolutely keep the mandates in place because I want to have a free bed in the hospital at some point to be able to do elective surgeries and help other people out. And so, just so many people are coming in here and dying. So it really depends on your perspective when it comes to the mandates. But it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. And you see, Austria has gone to a very aggressive national mandate. You have other countries like Greece that have gone to a mandate above a certain age. But then you saw what happened in Brussels over the weekend, Belgium, where you had massive violence. But by the way, when the Belgians, when they protest, they really protest, which I showed Belgians through the years. They like to break windows, and at least parts of them, some of them. But they announced that the booster is part of the requirement to get into bars and restaurants in Belgium. And that was part of the reason why you saw some of the violence on Sunday.
Before you move on, I just want to thank everyone who's buying badges. Whitney, Lane, Regan D. Very nice.
Thank you, Regan. Thank everybody who are buying badges on the screen. I appreciate your support. So that's what I know there.
One
and
thing
then
I wanted to mention though that's
Yeah.
crazy is like I know some people who are moving because of this. Like
moving
people,
because of what?
like people are in New York and because of the vaccine mandates, they're moving to Florida or they're moving to like states that have less restrictions. So it's, I mean, it is really impacting families.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, every state's handling this differently, and you've seen a variety of reasons people move across the country or leave their state. And, I think that people will have to figure out what, if where they live jives with how they feel you should be handling an endemic. And I think over time, you'll see state shifts. Some states take a stand one way or another, and folks will have to make a decision as to whether that's a place they want to continue to stay, or if they feel that some states aren't taking it seriously enough and they want to move to a state where they feel it's taking it more seriously, and vice versa, where they feel like the state is going overboard on stuff. Like, I'm going to move to a state where I can do whatever the hell I want. And the Florida case, right? Florida is like, yeah, you can do what you want in Florida. It's like not a thing here.
Erin Beth said, I'm in Colorado and have had 6 employees out in the last week with COVID. None of them contracted it at work. I hope we start trending down soon.
Yeah, I hope so too for everybody, so we can get back to normal. Let's fingers crossed that 2022. One of the hopes is, you saw the World Health Organization, which take them for what they're worth, said that Omicron actually offers plausible hope for stabilization and normalization, because with everyone having Omicron, and given how mild it is, that you have the closest thing to herd immunity, temporarily as it may be, and that we might have 2022 might be the closest thing we saw to 2019 in a while, because of the way Omicron has worked itself into the system. So that's interesting. And
Mitzi said, my mom is 101 and had COVID last year, almost died, got vaccinated twice, and has COVID again in Arizona. Well, we're wishing your mom very well and a quick recovery.
Yeah. It's remarkable, but I hope she gets better soon. One concerning thing that we saw today is that Regeneron and Eli Lilly say that their infusions that were once highly effective against previous variants are not effective against Omicron, and they told states to stop using the Regeneron treatment against Omicron, unfortunately. I mean, that's the difference of Omicron. If it's serious for folks, it's so different that the stuff that was working for previous variants isn't working for Omicron. So there's that.
Yeah, a lot of people. Whitney says, the California exodus is real.
Yeah.
Horse, of course, says, my mom is losing students on her caseload in New Jersey, and they are moving to Florida for this reason. Yeah,
so there's going to be some migration. I don't think you're seeing millions and millions of people moving, but you're only seeing tens of thousands, or potentially 100,000 plus, move due to how things are going, and we'll see how this shakes out in the next couple of years. I mean, it could be hundreds of thousands soon enough.
My hope is that they don't force boosters on anyone.
There's we'll see how it all shakes out,
because we know that it doesn't.
Well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of studies that have come out, and it really depends on
Jonah says we should move to Florida too.
Jonah, the pride of Gainesville, Florida. All right. Is that all things Omicron? We can get to final topic?
Really fast.
Yeah.
Getting it done says, I work in D.C. in the event industry. The mandates are causing a lot of headaches because it's inconsistent across the country. I have conferences canceling and taking their bids to Virginia. Yeah,
I mean, I think that states will have to find a balance for how they want to balance public health and business and the economy.
Do you think, I mean, call me crazy, but I think this should have been a federal thing.
Well, we're not a federal thing, meaning what?
Like I
one
just
rule
feel
for the country?
I just feel like there was so much miscommunication. People are still confused. I mean, it's so confusing for people between the vaccines, the masks, the boosters, the this. I mean,
yeah, there's been a lot of changing guidance over time. So, I mean, ultimately, we're a balance between federal rules and state rules, and that's kind of been the situation. So far. Unfortunately, I think you've seen in polling that people still had a majority kind of confidence in government and Fauci actually through the fall, and now everybody's basically underwater when it comes to confidence.
Adam asked.
Given what happened with Omicron.
Adam asked why you were in the tree. It's because he keeps leaning back into the tree.
Into this tree.
You're like, who was the guy that used to work for
Sean Spicer.
Yeah, Sean Spicer.
Sean Spicer came out of the bushes one time at the White House to try to avoid the press. So yeah, there's a tree behind me. It's our corner here. Anyway, all right. So that is all things Omicron. The last thing I was asked about was the Supreme Court with affirmative action. By the way, the Supreme Court has a huge caseload this docket. We're going to see a bunch of rulings in June. It is with that in mind that the Patreon this Thursday night is with Jan Crawford, chief legal correspondent, author on the Supreme Court of a New York Times bestseller. I will be talking to her Thursday night, 8 p.m. For Patreon members, go check out my link in bio, join the Patreon, and participate in that event. But we already have a preview that the Supreme Court is going to take on another big issue next year, which is affirmative action. It'll hear it in the next term, which means we won't have a decision until next spring, 2023. And so you have 40 years of precedent now, going back to the University of California versus Batis decision. Basically, that said that quotas are not allowed, but that race can be used by universities to get a diverse student body. It's effectively been upheld for the past 40 years, including in 2003. That was the Bollinger case at the University of Michigan, which was upheld. Notable there was Sandra Day O'Connor, who was on the court at that point, conservative, said, we're not going to need race-based admissions in 25 years. That was 03. 25 years from 03 is 2028. We're now, next year when they hear it, is 2023. So it's 20 years since Batis. So the court might be slightly a couple years ahead of her prediction or her hope, but ultimately that's just kind of a notable thing that you're going to see out there, and it'll make you really sound really smart when you tell people, you're like, well, when they upheld affirmative action in 03, they said 25 years. Well, it's been 20. It was upheld again in 2016 in the UT Austin case. And so both cases, so basically that's the precedent here. You have a 78, 03, 2016, and now you have a couple cases the court has put together to basically hear affirmative action at both a public university case and a private university case. One case against Harvard University brought to the court by Asian students says that Harvard is discriminating against Asians. They feel discriminated against because the feeling is that Harvard has too many Asians, so they are being rejected unfairly. Over at the University of North Carolina, more traditional case.
Move forward a little bit.
More traditional case, where am I falling into the tree?
You're actually in the tree.
Is that there is bias against whites, Asians, in favor of blacks, Hispanics, etc. That's the University of North Carolina, a public university. So it's interesting here. The court has kind of taken both cases, and they're going to hear them. Private universities and public universities basically have to abide by different rules. Harvard, which is a private entity, has to comply with a federal statute that bans race discrimination as a condition of receiving federal money. Meanwhile, the UNC case, because it's a public university, it has to satisfy the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause. Came out of the Civil War, which says you got to treat all races equally. Interestingly, the lower courts have ruled against both the plaintiffs in the Harvard case, the group that's taken up against Harvard, and the UNC case. Regardless of that, the Supreme Court has taken up both cases. This is the first time a 6-3 conservative court will hear this. And the argument by the plaintiffs in both cases is, if you want to have a diverse student body by experience, folks who might have ultimately dealt with challenges in their youth, difficult upbringing. If you want a diverse certain body, can't you use other attributes besides race to determine that? Now, typically universities practice holistic, admissions. They don't just sit there, having races. Race is just one thing in a mix they consider, in addition to grades, experiences, etc. Because ultimately, they want people on campus to experience both education and people that they don't experience in the life before it, and that ultimately will enrich them for being good American citizens. So it'll be very interesting to see how this case comes down.
I think that is so interesting. We were talking about this earlier, the Asian case at Harvard.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's very interesting because you don't typically hear that.
Move this forward. So
Yeah.
that you're not-
Oh, here.
There you go. Let's get you out
Am
of
I
the
better
tree
now? Alex is very worried about how close I was to the tree. Jonah's saying if the court is still 6-3 when they hear the case. Well, the thing is, Jonah, like the only change that could happen is Breyer, who's one of the 3 liberals, could retire 83 because the Republicans may take the Senate in the fall. So this is really Biden's, if you're a liberal who wants to leave the court and you want to ensure you're replaced by a liberal, so the court doesn't go 7-2 conservative, this would be your time to get out. I think it would stay 6-3 unless some other shocking things happen in the next 6 months. We'll see. You saying Clarence Thomas isn't so young? I guess anything's possible, but we'll see. What else? Anything else on the SCOTUS front? So we'll discuss all that and more for those of you interested in all things related to the court. And specifically, I've got a lot of questions about Roe v. Wade and how the court's going to rule related to abortion and what that's going to mean for the Roe v. Wade precedent, what's going to mean for states, etc. We'll see.
What about Thomas? Kate says Thomas needs to resign.
I don't know. Conservatives love Clarence Thomas. Liberals hate Clarence Thomas. For those asking, Clarence Thomas is 73 years old, and he turned 74. But like many, I don't think he would be likely to leave the court with Biden as president. If he feels... Thomas is one that he understands the politics of all this. By the way, Thomas was the only person who ruled last week when the court ruled 8-1 that Trump has to hand over his January 6th documents, that they're not protected by executive privilege. All the conservatives, all the liberals said he had to do it, except for Thomas, who's like, nope. So Thomas stands alone. Thomas ain't quitting. Thomas will die on the bench.
Magic Mike says, can the cute dog make another appearance this week?
The dog, Zoe the Pomeranian, my mother-in-law's dog, Alex's mom. No, the Pomeranian's a couple miles up.
Yeah, we're not staying
up that way. We're not. Anymore. No dog this week, guys. Sorry, but maybe we'll bring her back.
Because Melissa said, "Why don't you get your mom a real plant?"
Oh yeah, this is not. Well, this is like. This is a fake plant here.
No one stays here to take care of it.
No
but you know how we love real plants in our own apartment.
We do. We have a bunch of plant babysitters in New York right now. Hopefully, our plants are alive when we come back.
Oh yeah, we should check in on them. See how they're doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that it? It's been a pleasure, everybody. We have next week we'll do like more Olympics preview. We'll watch the situation in Russia and Ukraine. Magic Mike, I will get on. I think he was the one who asked me about American companies in Russia, so we'll get on that. We'll see what goes down. I guess Russia Ukraine is probably the biggest story we're watching. We'll see, and the fallout over Biden saying "stupid SOB" to the Fox reporter.
People are asking me to comment.
It'll be a win for both sides.
People are asking me to comment on Brittany and Jamie Lynn.
Yeah, what do you like? I can't get into the Brittany Jamie Lynn story because I don't know the truth, guys. Like, ultimately, like I want to believe Brittany on this stuff, and like I just don't like. I think Jamie Lynn is inserting herself into the story, like in the final chapter. Like, where have you been this whole time? And now she's like trying to make some money on a book, right? But we got to watch the Kanye West documentary in related to other news.
I'm fascinated.
On Netflix, we got to watch that. We'll let you know. But yeah, I mean, I've always been like free Britney on this stuff, but like in this case, like it's very hard to believe the truth stuff. And also, like if you've been watching Britney's Instagram posts in recent weeks, like very concerning stuff, guys. Like I know she's free to do whatever she wants, but I don't know. I've been staying away from that whole story.
You know what else we didn't discuss?
What?
But you talked about it, I think, on your Instagram. Adele canceling her show.
Adele. Hello. Adele, she was going to postpone it a couple months in Vegas. Allegedly came to see what the show was going to be like about a day or two before it was set to launch.
People were
According to some folks close to the situation, she was not happy with what she saw, and so she pushed back the performance, the whole set in Vegas, to a TBD date. So I feel for any folks that made a big plan to go to Vegas for the big opening of Adele. But we'll see.
Oh, that is so nice. Timster says, Mo and Al, you are awesome. You all are a blessing for all of us wanting accurate information.
Well, thank you, Timster22, for your lovely comments. We're just trying to keep it real here, trying to keep it accurate, trying to keep everyone informed on what's going on. What else, Al?
You have a couple things.
Okay.
One is Michael Laurie says, next week, can you talk about the interest rates?
So one of the things that we're watching, obviously, and I should have mentioned it, is the markets right now. This is the worst month since March 2020. And by the way, it's very interesting. Crypto is sort of matching the equity markets now. So like traditional stocks down, crypto down, and you always thought like crypto kind of did its own, march to the beat of its own drummer. But so many folks are getting away from risk right now. The feeling is that interest rates are set to go up this year after many, many, many years of being down. And so the feeling is that money won't be as cheap, which means there won't be as much money in the market, which means people aren't betting on things going up. See how one impacts the other. And so with interest rates going up, you're going to see not as many people taking out basically free money loans to then go invest and buy houses and buy cars and buy stocks and buy crypto and buy whatever. And so you're seeing basically that happen right now. By the way, keep in mind the stock market is up 100% over the last 3 years, 100%. And we've had a basically bull market run since the collapse of 08 into 09, basically since summer 09. The entirety of Obama, 4 years of Trump, and now a year of Biden has been straight, for the most part, stocks going up with a little hitches along the way. So, let's see what happens here. But in historic terms, we have never seen this long of stocks going up. I mean, there's many people, Gen Z probably doesn't even remember that stocks used to go down. Yes, stocks sometimes go down. And you sometimes have a couple bad years. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're making investments.
Jonah said crypto's down so much I saw Zussel working at Home Depot.
I don't know if Zussel's, I think Zussel's in Ecuador, Jonah, but there was a time if Zussel, our friend Zussel, who's sometimes on here, who was early on the crypto train, like 2011 crypto, like Bitcoin's $10, you should buy some. I'm like, what the hell is Bitcoin? I think there was a time where you could have retired for good, like last year when Bitcoin was like 64,000. Now Bitcoin's down to like 33,000. I hope it doesn't dip below 30,000, but it's anyone's guess. And I did a crypto thing on Patreon back in May of last year, and the general rule of thumb is, view crypto as like a side investment, no more than 5% of your portfolio typically. Once you have your debts paid, once you have your main stuff paid, it's highly volatile. And it's been like Vegas the past couple of years, guys. Like meme coins, meme stocks, like things have gone insane with all the money that's been out there, and I think you're starting to see a slight stabilization, at least for now. But we'll see. There's been many a fool who's tried to predict things in the market. So come to me next week, and the market will be like skyrocketing again. They're like, Mosh said it's going to be down for a while. Like, I can't make predictions. So
Oliver says, I'm from the UK and started following last summer with Israel news. Don't usually watch live, but have university essays to do. Keep up the good work of updating me on world news.
Thanks for tuning in from the UK. I hope you get to bed, probably maybe you're waking up super early in the morning over there. I will say this. I do get lots of notes from folks in Europe who follow and are like, listen, I know you cover mainly American stuff, but I like following you. But I do try to ensure that I cover as much, major international issues that I can on this feed. So,
Jess Ford says you should watch Medaling on Peacock for figure skating drama refresh pre-Olympics.
All right, I'll take a look at that. Good for our list.
Chad asked if we saw Yellow Jackets. No, but it's on our list.
It's on it. Yeah, Yellow Jackets on the list. We're second episode into Ozark right now, which Ozark's interesting. Their final season, they've separated into 2 parts. So you have 7 episodes of season 4 that are just out, and this final 7 will come out later in 2022. I don't get paid by Netflix, but maybe I should.
So something that's going on in the thread right now that we could bring to light for anyone who's listening, because anyone who listens to this after doesn't see the comments.
Yeah.
So I think it was Melissa brought up that, did you see what's happening with Carhartt, that they are mandating vaccines for, someone wrote S. Miller wrote 5,500 employees. They're keeping the vaccine mandate, so people are not now throwing away their Carhartt clothing.
Yeah, I mean that's it'll be very interesting to see
overalls.
Those are Carhartt.
Yeah.
Okay, so it'll be interesting to see now I've put it all together. How consumers impact companies' decisions here when it comes to the vaccine, and you're going to see that play out over the next months and years, I think. So I will get on the Carhartt story. we'll go from there.
Thank you. See,
Thanks, everybody.
We learn from you guys.
I enjoy learning from all of you guys every day. In fact, that'll be a topic that I'm addressing in a few different places. I'm speaking at the College of Worcester, March 1st in Ohio. If you're near Worcester, Ohio, you'll see me speak there. And then we have a couple of exciting things coming this summer that I'm not quite ready to announce yet, but we'll be in a couple of parts of the country.
Yes, speaking of, Jordan McGraw says, "What are
Jordan
you
McGraw's
drinking
back
tonight?"
Jordan McGraw had a lovely tea, Moroccan mint tea. That it's Monday night, and we took a slight break. I had a really good. What do we have over the weekend? A couple dirty martinis.
Yeah, you're loving the dirty martini.
Dirty martini, great. Had it with I think a Tito's on Saturday night.
What are you drinking?
It's 7:15 Pacific time. I assume McGraw's on the West Coast. I was assuming he's on the West Coast. What are you drinking tonight, dude? Let me know. The world wants to know.
Shaken, not
stirred. In fact, I agree with that. I actually like the martini in a glass on the rocks, like in a tumbler, and not in the martini glass. I just think the martini glass is such an annoying contraption to drink a drink out of.
I agree.
And it spills.
Especially the first sip.
The first sip.
S. Miller says, Worcester Talk open to the public, question mark.
Worcester Talk is open to the public. I will send details. And let you know if you're anywhere in the Worcester area. Come by. We're talking about the relationship of the media, trust, the public, lessons I'm learning from you guys on Instagram, and we'll go from there. There's Jordan McGraw. There's a whole conversation about happening about him in the comments now.
Jordan's having a tequila soda.
Yeah, he's a singer. He opened for Joe Jonas Brothers on the tour recently on the West Coast, and his dad is Dr. Phil.
His dad is Dr. Phil. His wife is Morgan Stewart. She's pregnant with their second baby. Yeah, he has a lot going on.
Yeah, a lot. You're keeping busy, Jordan. All right, everyone. It's been a pleasure. It's been great to see you on this Monday night. And I'll keep you up to date. The Worcester date is March 1st. March 1st, I'll be in Worcester, Ohio. I'll send details on that soon. All right. Bye, guys.